This is the Brave New Coin Crypto Conversation, hosted by Andy Pickering.
Hi everyone, Andy Pickering here. I'm your host and welcome to the Crypto Conversation, a Brave New Coin podcast where we talk to the people building the future in the Bitcoin, blockchain, and cryptocurrency space. Today's podcast is brought to you by Leverage, a new fully featured decentralized futures exchange without compromise. Are you ready to trade the future of crypto today? Well, Leverage is a DEX, so you can trade with your keys and sign orders just with one click, and Leverage is fast. Yes, indeed, Leverage is powered by Gluon, a new layer 2 solution with the scalability and speed of a centralized exchange and the super low fees of a DEX. Yes, Leverage, the new exchange that combines the best features of CeFi and DeFi, so you can trade crypto spot or crypto derivatives with up to 100x leverage while maintaining control of your assets at all times. It's like William Gibson said, the future is already here, but in this case, it's evenly distributed and completely decentralized. Go to leverage.io, and leverage is spelled Leverj.io, and trade the future of crypto today. Hi everyone, Andy Pickering here. It is December. We're just a few days out from Christmas and just about 1 week out from closing out the turbulent year that was 2020. Now, as I said in yesterday's episode, just to keep things rolling between now and January, we are republishing 4 of my favorite podcast episodes from this year. 4 really quirky episodes that I very much enjoyed, and I hope and think that you will enjoy too. So here is the second in the Crypto Conversation podcast Best of 2020 series. It's my chat with Robert Breedlove. Now, this is easily one of my favorite podcasts of the year. Robert has emerged as one of the deepest thinkers in Bitcoin, and he really takes a full 360-degree wide-angle approach that takes inspiration from history, philosophy, literature, spirituality. You know, Robert is a really profound, esoteric thinker and writer, really, and I really did enjoy getting his unique and compelling perspectives on Bitcoin. So what else is there to say? I recommend you get comfortable, pour yourself a dram of something decent. It is Christmas after all, and have a listen to what Robert has to say. This one goes deep. All right, let's get on with the show. My guest today is Robert Breedlove. Robert is the CEO of Parallax Digital, a firm specializing in digital asset investment management and consulting for the emerging digital securities space. The company is founded on the premise that Bitcoin will radically reshape the global economy, and I think the name Parallax Digital is supposed to be reflective of the new possibilities enabled by the new digital economy. Welcome to the show, Robert.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
So you're quite an interesting guy, Robert, and I've been following you for a little while now, and you've published a few really interesting pieces, both on Medium and on Twitter, and I think it'd be, really interesting to talk through some of those. Just before we do that, why don't you just introduce yourself and perhaps talk a little bit about your path into the wonderful world of digital assets, and let's get the background on Parallax Digital.
Yeah, sure. I'll give you the shorter version. So my background is as a certified public accountant. I have a master's and undergraduate degree in finance and accounting. I was a certified public accountant for a number of years before I decided I didn't like the linear career path. So I branched out into the entrepreneurial world where I was a CFO for a number of companies, mostly focused in tech. I started investing in crypto assets in 2014, but not heavily. I was just kind of speculating on Bitcoin. And it was actually in 2016 and early 17 when I discovered Ethereum and the concept of smart contracts that I really started to fall down the rabbit hole. When I read Szabo's piece on smart contracts, it was actually written in the 90s. That was my proverbial light bulb moment when I realized the entire finance industry was a smart contract with human beings on top of it. So at that time, I thought the technology was going to be super disruptive. I started investing into large, medium, small cap crypto assets. Where my money went, my mind followed, and I became much more of a Bitcoin rationalist, and what some disparagingly call maximalist. Through that process, I had exited from my previous CFO role. I wanted to start my own company. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and this was all during the 2017 bull run. So I had everyone in the world that knew I was involved investing in this space, kept contacting me, asking me how they could get exposure. Organically through that process, we launched Parallax Digital, which is today it's a multi-strategy crypto asset hedge fund. And then we did some consulting as well, focused on both Bitcoin and digital securities.
Very, very nice. And well, it's an interesting time to be talking to you, Robert, because of course this week, 1 or 2 days ago, we had the Bitcoin halving. And so maybe that's a nice way just to kick off. And did you see that I think the final Bitcoin block that was found by the mining pool, F2 pool, did you see that they put an interesting message into the Coinbase?
I did. I saw. I think it was about the Fed printing a couple of $1 trillion.
Obviously, it was a nod and a shout out to Satoshi's original block, but I think it was the reference to the New York Times article, and the headline was, with a 2.3 trillion cash injection, the Fed's plan far exceeds the 2008 rescue. So it's quite a nice tie back to Satoshi.
I like that they're paying homage to Satoshi, and I also like that it is a battle cry. Bitcoin is a peaceful revolution, but I definitely think intelligent placements like that serve as kind of a rallying cry for Bitcoiners in the separation of money and state. So I really like that.
Absolutely. And any thoughts on the halving itself, or what we've seen happen in the immediate 48 hours afterwards? I know it's a little bit silly to try and speculate too much at this early point, but it is halving week, so we might as well.
Yeah, I appreciate the juxtaposition of Bitcoin just so silently and simply churning, from one block reward to the next in the course of one block. So its monetary policy just seamlessly shifting. Whereas in the rest of the world, we have this mad cacophony of central bankers and analysts and policymakers and politicians fighting over how much money to print, how to distribute it, who gets what. It highlights how much more energy efficient Bitcoin is relative to central banking as a model. And, as history has shown us, energy efficient systems tend to outcompete in the long run. I just think it's exciting to see that Bitcoin is slowly but surely doing away with this clown show we call politics. Money should not be a political instrument. And Bitcoin is taking the world that direction.
Yes, indeed. The interesting thing about you, Robert, as I said, is, you've written several really high quality, I think, Medium posts, and you've had a one or two really nice Twitter threads as well. And any single one of your Medium posts could easily fulfill one single podcast episode, no problem at all. And I know you have done that on other podcasts, but I thought today it would be cool maybe just to cover off one or two of your Medium posts and Twitter threads, and just perhaps do it from the perspective of trying to kind of glean some of the key insights from each one, and perhaps by doing that we'll get your quite learned perspectives on Bitcoin. How does that sound?
Sounds like a lot of fun. Never done an episode like that, so looking forward to it.
The first way I discovered you, I think, Robert, was a tweet storm you wrote in 2019, and this is going to sound slightly ridiculous, but your tweet storm was 62 tweets long. So that is, I'm not sure if that's excessive by tweet storm standards, but the funny thing about this, of course, is this is a theme with you. You do tend to go big and long when you write these thought pieces on Bitcoin. So from that perspective, 63 tweets is actually quite concise. What were you trying to do with this tweet storm?
Yeah, it's funny. So, a lot of people, including Pomp, discovered me due to the long-winded tweet storm. So I guess I've got a bit of a reputation for that. Certainly didn't intend to be that way. I originally just wanted to take the things I was writing, which are also long-winded, and summarize them, make them a little more palatable in Twitter. But in any case, that was a June 2019 tweet storm, and it was just my attempt at explaining Bitcoin to someone that doesn't know anything about money, like other than they've used money, essentially was the only prerequisite, which is pretty much everyone. And try to just go soup to nuts, like what is money? Why did gold become money? How did government corrupt and co-opt gold? And why is Bitcoin superior across all monetary traits? And the spiritual aim of that is I really think that helping people understand that the economic system we live within today is a dishonest system, and that Bitcoin represents the most perfectly honest money the world has ever known. Trying to distill the complexity into a more simplistic form to reach a wider audience. That was the intent.
Yeah, well, look, I think you actually did an admirable job there. I mean, I'm sort of, teasing you a little bit when I say 63 tweets is a little excessive, but, what you've really done is tried to express, the history of money, economy, and the birth of Bitcoin. And, to do that across 63 tweets is, reasonably impressive, I think.
Yeah, it takes like 18 minutes to read, I think, if at an average reading speed. So it's a worthwhile investment if you don't know anything about Bitcoin.
Indeed. So, look, if you are on Twitter, and a lot of people listening to this will be on Twitter, so that was my starting point with you, Robert, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes, of course. The second piece I want to cover, and we can probably dig into your Medium pieces in a little bit more detail. You famously wrote an open letter to Ray Dalio and published this on Medium. Of course, a link to this will be in the show notes. But, do be warned, listeners, this thing is a 104-minute read. And Robert, because I'm a little bit nerdy myself, I did a quick copy and paste just to see how many words you'd written here. And it's 26,000 words, just over. So we've gone from a 63 tweet storm now to a 26,000 word essay written as an open letter to Ray Dalio. You better explain yourself here. What's the background?
So this is the longest piece, so I'm glad we're getting the worst out of the way. I started reading Ray's book Principles in, I think, February or March of last year. As I was going through his book, I already knew that his stated position was anti-Bitcoin. He says he didn't believe in it for the reasons I highlight in the letter. But as I'm reading through his book Principles, it continually dawned on me that more and more of his stated work and life principles, which are the elements of his worldview, positively embodied Bitcoin. So for instance, the pinnacle of Ray's cultural paradigm at his firm Bridgewater is the idea meritocracy. And this is essentially a free market for ideas. So he tries to create an environment in his company that the best ideas rise to the surface or win out, regardless of seniority, hierarchy, these other bureaucratic frictions you typically perceive in an organization. The idea of meritocracy is intended to be opposite to that. It's intended to let ideas freely compete on their own merits to make sure the best ones win out, to be assimilated into organizational modeling and investment decision making. So Ray's recipe for the idea of meritocracy consisted of the addition of three of his principles. So the idea of meritocracy equaled radical truth plus radical transparency plus believability weighted decision making. And when you really peel back the layers on what that means, he's basically saying that radical truth means always, actually he says an accurate representation of reality. So accurate representations of reality should always be shared within the organization. Radical transparency means you should tell everyone as much of everything as you can. He did make some limitations for, say, like salary information. He didn't think that was useful to share across the board. And then believability-weighted decision-making meant that people that had a proven track record in any specific area should have a more heavily weighted opinion on that matter. For instance, if you are a bond trader and they're polling the organization for a bond investment strategy, that individual trader's track record would give him a heavier or lighter weighting in that decision versus just like a straight democratic vote, one for one. So adding those three elements together, it created what Ray called the idea meritocracy, which is this free market for organizational ideas. And when you start to understand Bitcoin, that it is just a free market money, like it is competing based on its own merits, largely, first of all, as money, it's more durable, divisible, portable, recognizable, and scarce than anything we've ever had. It actually embodies absolute scarcity, which, as I argue in another piece, is a one-time discovery that cannot be disrupted. And then it is also the embodiment of radical truth. Like Bitcoin is open source software. It is just information. It is language. It can be readily inspected by anyone, which adds to its trustworthiness. It's radically transparent for kind of the same reasons. Like it's just open and honest about what it is. And then it has what I translated believability into is skin in the game. So like the more skin in the game you have, the more believable you are. And I argue that the market participants in Bitcoin all have skin in the game. Holders expend resources to acquire Bitcoin. Node operators are incentivized to keep it honest, and miners are disincentivized from promulgating false information.
Well, the interesting thing about Ray Dalio, of course, Ray is obviously one of the world's best known macro investors, I suppose, and he publishes these big think pieces himself, and he has recently been making the case for gold as a store of value and a hedge against the macroeconomic uncertainty. And he was doing this even before the current pandemic crisis really hit, but he has really been beating the drum for gold. But he's really coming very close to saying the same thing for Bitcoin. Without
in Bitcoin circles, this became an issue, right? Everyone was saying Ray keeps writing pieces that all you have to do is find and replace gold for Bitcoin, and he's saying the same thing, but he's never acknowledging that Bitcoin's better than gold across those 5 critical traits.
That's right. And am I correct in saying that you saw Ray speak somewhere and you were able to ask him about Bitcoin? Did I hear that somewhere?
I did, and I posted this on YouTube. So I had been, his book is long. It's 600 or 700 pages. So I was slowly incorporating a lot of, I didn't cover all of his principles, but I covered a lot of the main ones. And I was slowly incorporating those into my work over time. But then there was an event in Los Angeles in November where Ray was going to speak and have a Q&A session after. So that became my impetus to finish. And I published it the day before I went to that event. And then I got there early for his speaking engagement. I was first in line to ask him a question. And in a very long-winded form, I essentially said, Ray, how do you see the absolute scarcity of Bitcoin playing into a world where the scarcity of money has been totally compromised by central banks? And Ray gave this very eloquent and intelligent assessment of the macroeconomic situation that got us into kind of where we are today with excessive central bank expansionary monetary policy. But then he gave a very ill-informed response on Bitcoin, basically saying that it was too volatile to be a medium of exchange or a store of value, which is an easily refuted argument.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And when you started off talking about Ray's idea of this idea meritocracy, and so Ray famously in his book explains that anyone is able to criticize each other as long as it comes from a place of knowledge and all that stuff, and he even uses an example of one of his team grading his performance in a meeting, and I think they gave him not a very good result. And you start your piece by, I think you say something like, Ray, you deserve an F for your assessment of Bitcoin's significance and future prospects. And I love the way you write here, Robert. You say, although there are very few of us, anyone who has the requisite depth of understanding in the fields of computer science, monetary history, game theory, economics, and mathematics, and has spent the time intensely studying Bitcoin, which takes a lot, will agree with this harsh evaluation of your short-sighted assessment of this momentous monetary innovation.
Yeah, so that is one of the things Ray does at Bridgewater is they encourage candid reviews up or down, right? So managers reviewing subordinates and vice versa. And I shared, one of the reviews was a subordinate giving him a D for his preparation for a meeting. But I based my letter, I was assessing Ray's assessment of Bitcoin based on this little 3-minute video, which is also included in the letter, where he essentially laid out 3 counter arguments against Bitcoin. First, he said that he was sold on blockchain technology, but did not believe in Bitcoin. And as we all know, it's totally nonsensical. Like, first of all, the only market-proven use case for a quote-unquote blockchain is Bitcoin. There may be some marginal arguments for, Ethereum and some of these other distributed compute platforms, but the by and large mainstream market success of blockchain technology is Bitcoin, and that's not even arguable. The second counter argument he makes is that he thinks Bitcoin could be disrupted by another cryptocurrency, which that's a bit more of a nuanced understanding, which I really tried to go into in the Zero piece, essentially arguing that Bitcoin's path-dependent emergence makes it super resistant to disruption. And kind of in a nutshell, for the same economic and mathematical reasons we only have one analog gold, we're very likely to only have one digital gold, which Bitcoin is so far in the lead in that race that it doesn't seem like it can lose at this point. And then his third argument was he believed that price-stable central bank issued currencies would be issued, or corporate currencies like Libra. And, again, that's true. These things are going to be issued. But as we know by looking at the history of monetary evolution, money is a single-purpose technology. It's to move value across space and time. And assuming the characteristics of liquidity are, on all else being equal, if you will, across divisibility, durability, portability, and recognizability, money competes on scarcity. And Bitcoin is absolutely scarce money. It's basically perfect scarcity. So you can't really outcompete Bitcoin in terms of monetary policy. So this is why I think most Bitcoin rationalists, it's not that they're diehard Bitcoin per se, it's just that they're looking at the market and assimilating what signals it's putting off, which is basically selecting Bitcoin as money, given that it's the fastest growing asset in history.
Yes, indeed. Well, just before we move to your third piece then, why is it, do you think, Robert, that people such as Ray, because obviously Ray is, you'd have to say he's a smart guy, right? He hasn't got to where he's got by
Definitely.
being stupid. But there are a lot of smart guys like Ray who, for whatever reason, they just aren't quite able to grasp the real significance and value of Bitcoin. And look, we're just using Ray as an example. There are a lot of people like that around the world. On the flip side, I guess, there are, I don't know how many Bitcoiners there are in the world, 5 million or maybe a little bit more. But yeah, what do you think is the kind of stumbling block for smart people like Ray? Why can't they get it?
Yeah, and Ray is an interesting case because he makes a close study of history, and he does a really good job at looking at the path things have taken to get to where they are. But when he talks about money, and I've followed his work very closely for a long time, and he describes why gold became money, he says because it had intrinsic value. And to me, that's just a signal that he has not gone to first principles of why gold became money. Again, it's about the monetary traits. So monetary metals historically were the most divisible, durable, recognizable, and portable substance. And of those, gold was the most scarce. That's why gold outcompeted all other monetary metals to become dominant. Now, it's interesting too, but before the gold standard was what flourished worldwide, and we had telecommunication channels to move gold-backed currencies quickly and easily, silver actually had marginal utility because gold had such a high value to weight, that silver was used more for day-to-day transactions. So silver had more divisibility and portability than gold. So that's why it sort of operated side by side with gold for years. But as soon as we started abstracting gold into paper and later electronic form, silver was demonetized, right? So, and Ray's saying that gold has intrinsic value, that's an economic fallacy. Intrinsic value does not exist. All value is subjective. So we all have wants that we're trying to fulfill, and we all demand different things to try to satisfy those wants. You cannot assign something an intrinsic value. Just the only thing that has intrinsic value are people, basically, and that's what Western civilization is founded on, right? Is the sovereignty of the individual. So you're innocent until proven guilty. Like there's no object that has intrinsic value. So anytime anyone says that, you can immediately pick that out as an argumentative fallacy because it's flat out wrong. So in short, I just think Ray has not taken a first principles approach to gold. He hasn't read Austrian economics, which is not his fault, right? Because it's not part of the government mandated curriculum. Like the reason all of us digital natives or Bitcoiners mostly are familiar with Austrian economics is because of the internet. Like we, as an autodidact, I can go and dig into these questions really deep until I hit some bedrock that you can't really turn over. And I just don't think Ray has done that deep dive.
Yes, that sounds about right, Robert. And I think the intrinsic value thing, I think you're exactly right, because a lot of people who are perhaps, maybe less inclined to do the kind of research that you would think that Ray would, and certainly much less interested in monetary history. But that is an easy just off the cuff criticism that people make of Bitcoin. They say, well, it's not real, it doesn't exist, it doesn't have any intrinsic value, whereas the dollar, they will say, does have value, and it's hard for them to try and make the mental leap, beyond accepting that, everything is actually subjective, and two, that, this digital piece of code, really just zeros and ones, can have potentially much harder, more stable long-term value than anything on the planet.
Absolutely. And there's a great piece by Carl Menger called On the Origins of Money. It's very short, sort of difficult to read, but very short. And he essentially says that, when people come in contact with the new money via a trade network, there's like a small select group that realize first that money has greater salability characteristics, which essentially means exchangeability or marketability. And they adopt it first. And it's those early adopters that sort of impose that money on the rest of society because it has superior traits. And I think that's just what we're seeing with Bitcoin, right? It's following a very similar evolutionary path as to what gold did. And at first it was a collectible, then a store of value. When it accreted enough value, it became a medium of exchange. And when it was used widely enough as a medium of exchange, it became a unit of account. Even today, when we think in dollars, we don't actually think in dollars. We were thinking in gold. Like dollars used to be gold. They were just an abstraction of gold. But we had this sleight of hand by the government where they sort of pulled the gold backing from beneath the dollar surreptitiously over time.
Very good, Robert. Well, let's move to your next piece. This one's interesting. It's called The Number Zero and Bitcoin. And this is a lighter, shorter read at 39 minutes and 10,000 words, Robert. Just before we dig into this one, I'm not sure if esoteric is the right word, but it is a little bit esoteric, and you've really, delved really deep into I guess, monetary history and almost, the history of civilization, religion here. Is there some sort of, do you have a real background or interest in this as well? Is that why you're so keen to sort of do these deep dives?
Where it really comes from is people asking good questions that I am digging into to try and formulate a good answer for. And the impetus for this one, which I state right in the beginning, is like, there's a very popular argument, people are like, well, why Bitcoin? There's 10,000 cryptocurrencies. What makes Bitcoin any different than any other cryptocurrency? It's just open source code. It can be copied and pasted. Like, who knows which one's going to win? And, at the surface level, that's a concerning argument. Like, if you don't understand, what I get into in the piece is path dependence, then you don't really have an understanding of that. So this is the piece I wish Ray would read, actually. I mean, I would hope he'd read the open letter, but then when he really wants to look at money from a first principle standpoint and why Bitcoin is as unstoppable of an idea as the number 0 was, and how they have sort of a similar emergence pattern, I think that would really help him see the light, so to speak.
Yes, and look, it's a little bit difficult to sort of to gloss over this article or discuss it at a high level, because the research that you've put into this, and it is really about the history and wisdom of math and numbers and different civilizations, and how they've, how humanity really has learnt to count, and the place of 0 in that, and then you make the case for Bitcoin sort of taking that as a next critical construct for civilization.
Yeah, this one is, I think it's worth a full read. I have many people have told me they read it twice. This one, I put the most stylistic polish onto. I really tried to make this an enjoyable read, an entertaining read. So I hope that came through. And it's been by far my most well-received piece. It's probably 6 times more viewed than anything else, so it's way up there. And then it's being or has been translated into a lot of other languages. Someone did Spanish, someone did Russian, someone's working on Greek, and I think German and Portuguese. I've lost count at this point, but it's a really exciting piece. And I guess to maybe try and put it in a nutshell is that numeral systems historically did not always include the number 0. Like, many civilizations didn't have a concept for a number 0. Like, they understood maybe nothingness, but it wasn't part of the mathematical, it wasn't part of their numeral system. And the number 0 was discovered, quote unquote, depending on whether you think numerals are an invention or numbers are like part of a latent reality, in ancient India by a mathematician named Brahmagupta. And he started using this singular dot as a representation for nothingness in numbers. So it's kind of like the original 0. And what's interesting about that is they actually say they reportedly discovered it in meditation. So it was the experience of the meditative void, which they called shunyata, which they basically captured in numeric form as 0. And once 0 became part of the mathematical lexicon, it made the numeral system exponentially more efficient. You could do calculation faster. You could represent large digits and amounts in much smaller space. So it just dramatically improved productivity of the numeral system. And another thing it did was 0 acted as the gateway into the negative domain of numbers. And once you get into negative numbers, you unlock all of these miraculous innovations from mathematics. So for instance, the square root of -1, as we may remember from school, is I, which is an imaginary number because you cannot have a square root of -1, which sounds kind of silly at first until you realize that by plotting numbers on the real and imaginary plane, you discover infinity. And imaginary numbers are a key precursor to brain waves, to analyzing brain waves, to constructing wireless technologies, to doing fractal modeling, which is like the geometry of nature, which I put a picture of the Mandelbrot in the piece. And so basically 0 opens up the gateway to modernity. And then the other thing it does is 0 becomes the cornerstone of calculus, which today all physical sciences, so everything you see or touch or interact with, like physics, chemistry, biology, binary code, they all depend on calculus to function. So essentially every miracle of modernity is because of 0. And that's what made it outcompete other numeral systems that didn't include a zero.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think Yuval Harari talks about this in *Sapiens*. And look, as a student of history, I'm sure you've read *Sapiens*. And, he makes the case, I guess, that, it's humanity's ability to share and construct and share these imaginary fictions that we tell each other that gives humanity the ability to work together across tribes. And I guess the invention of zero and the number system is very much in parallel with that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Harari's thesis is that, the reason humans dominate the earth is because we can cooperate flexibly in large numbers.
Yes.
So, for instance, bees can cooperate in large numbers, but they can't necessarily create a social institution to change their collective action across time. Whereas, gorillas, they can only get up to about the Dunbar number, say 150 strong, before they start to fork off into other clans. But as humans, we can construct these useful fictions, right? Like a nation state or money or civil liberties, and we can coordinate our action with those I think he calls them imagined orders, and that just gives us an ability to dominate the world, because we can then accrue our learnings across time, in writing and heuristics and mythology and all these things. We accumulate knowledge and get better generation to generation, whereas these other species that cannot do that sort of stay the same, minus a little evolutionary advance.
Exactly right. And I think we probably just proved your original point that, there is really no such thing as intrinsic value, because these shared fictions, whether it's money, the nation state, or the Mercedes brand, these are exactly that. They are simply shared constructs of our imagination.
That's exactly right. And in that sphere, the most useful fictions tend to outcompete over time. And, that's why he's, 0-1, because it made, the purpose of math is to count and calculate things. So zero made math easier. So a zero-based numeral system outcompeted. Historically, money, which is basically meant to be a reflection, an epitome of time, if you will. So time spent in production, people sacrifice their time to make money and then use that money to redeem for commensurate sacrifices from others. So in that context, gold was the closest representation we could have to time, to transferable time, if you will, or tokenized time. And because it was the most relatively scarce monetary metal, but Bitcoin, represents the discovery, kind of like the discovery of the number zero, but the discovery of absolute scarcity, in that no matter how much time we allocate towards its production, we cannot make any more, just like time itself. So I think it's been popular among Bitcoiners to say there's only two things in the universe that are absolutely scarce, and that's time and Bitcoin. So that's how big of a breakthrough it is.
Very nicely said. Look, Robert, I pulled out a few different quotes from the zero piece, and look, there's so many of them, but I've got one here. So you say, like the invention of zero, which led to the discovery of nothing as something in mathematics and other domains, Bitcoin is the catalyst of a worldwide paradigmatic phase change, which some have started calling the Great Awakening. What numeral is to number and zero is to the void for mathematics, Bitcoin is to absolute scarcity for money. And then you go on to say, more than just a new monetary technology, Bitcoin is an entirely new economic paradigm, an uncompromisable base money protocol for a global digital non-state economy. And to better understand this, we need to understand the nature of path dependence. Now, you've mentioned path dependence a couple of times on the podcast, just sort of in passing, but do you want to just briefly explain what the path dependence of Bitcoin is?
Absolutely. So path dependence is a very nuanced concept, and it essentially means how sensitive is an outcome to the order of events that led to it. And kind of in the broadest sense, it means history tends to have inertia. So the very simple example I like to give is you get a dramatically different result if you take a shower and then dry yourself off versus if you dry yourself off and then take a shower. So the order of events matters for the outcome. And in that sense, Bitcoin was released into the world at a time when no innovation like it existed. People wrote it off and considered it a joke initially. And this kind of gave it cover and time to organically develop, both be adopted by holders and for its mining network to expand organically. And the argument there is that if you tried to release a new Bitcoin into the world today, into a world that's aware of Bitcoin, that it would inevitably be attacked, right? And it would be attacked at a time when it's vulnerable, when it has very weak chain security, liquidity, and network effects. So, and not only is this, that's a thought experiment, but we also sort of have this real world reinforcement of that thought experiment in the abject failure of Bitcoin Cash, which essentially forked Bitcoin, attempted to make larger blocks ostensibly to increase payment throughput, and had the same monetary policy as Bitcoin, was still absolutely scarce, but completely failed against Bitcoin because the value of a currency is established at its social layer, right? And Satoshi ingeniously optimized for the monetary traits at the social layer such that there's a great asymmetry trying to campaign people that say the holders or believers in Bitcoin today to get them to switch to a new social contract because Bitcoin is already absolutely scarce, resistant to confiscation, counterfeit, and inflation. So there's no design space left really to disrupt Bitcoin. And further to that, considering how Bitcoin Cash tried to take that attack vector, like even as a Bitcoin holder, you don't really have to do anything. Like the default strategy or the shelling point, if you will, is to just hold because you get allocated Bitcoin Cash as well when they fork the chain. So when you take these things, in combination, it makes Bitcoin, which is really just an idea of absolutely scarce, unconfiscatable, unstoppable money, a really unstoppable idea. And that's why I argue that, it can't necessarily be disrupted any more than the number 0 could be disrupted.
Yes, Robert. And look, for any of the listeners, if you are enjoying nerding out a little bit on these ideas, do recommend that you read this piece because it really does go deep, and I think you're actually a really good writer, Robert. I won't read out too many more of your quotes, but I think it's a really
fire
good
away.
piece.
I don't mind. Thank you, and thank you.
Well, I did want to just finish off on this, and then we'll go to a break, and we'll finish off with the hot take round. But I also saw that you're working on a book. You said on your website. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always reading and writing. That's all I do in my spare time is read and write. Mostly read. Writing is new to me, but I'm learning to like it more. It's very painful, but it certainly sharpens my understanding, and people seem to enjoy it. So I'm going to keep it up. But I will say that the book is not something I'm doing full time. So if everyone could just please be patient, I'm gonna take my time with it.
Absolutely. Well, in the meantime, you've written two extremely strong, I think, and deep pieces on Bitcoin. So links to those will be in the show notes. And listeners, if you've got a spare half hour to an hour on hand and you're really ready to sit down with perhaps a nice single malt and just get comfortable and kick back, I think you'll really get good value out of those pieces.
I promise my goal is to write a 10-minute piece, which would be 3,000 words. So the next one, I'll try to make it super digestible.
Awesome. All right, well, let's go to a very quick break, and then we'll come back, Robert, and we'll finish off with the Crypto Conversation Hot Take Round.
Whether you're an enterprise fund manager or a retail trader, buying and selling cryptocurrencies successfully requires price discovery you can rely on. Brave New Coin's liquid indices provide trusted US dollar prices for Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Ripple. Featuring end-of-day or intraday outputs, you can count on the BLX, ELX, and XRPLX for accurate US dollar pricing for smart contract oracles, settlement price discovery, net asset valuation, and performance analysis. Visit bravenewcoin.com to find out more.
Are you ready to trade the future of crypto today? Introducing Leverage, a full-featured decentralized futures exchange without compromise. Leverage is a DEX. Trade with your keys and sign with one click. Leverage is fast. It's powered by Gluon, a Layer 2 solution with the scalability and speed of a centralized exchange and the low fees of a DEX. Say goodbye to exchange hacks, front-running, Ethereum network congestion, and high gas fees. Leverage, the new exchange that combines the best features of CeFi and DeFi so you can trade crypto spot and derivatives with up to 100x leverage while maintaining control of your assets at all times. Like William Gibson said, the future is already here, but in this case, it's evenly distributed and completely decentralized. Go to www.leverj.io and trade the future of crypto today.
All right, we're back and I'm with Robert Breedlove. Robert is, I think, the founder at Parallax Digital, and he is a Bitcoin rationalist, maximalist, and he's written some good pieces on Medium, which I've enjoyed discussing today. But Robert, I like to finish each Crypto Conversation podcast with a quick round of Crypto Conversation hot takes. Are you up for it?
Let's do it.
All right, well, I just want your hot takes, your hot fire. Take your best shot. Here we go. Robert, where do you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-coin opportunist spectrum?
I believe that Bitcoin has sparked a wave of innovation, which, who knows what we call it. Some people call it the trust net, which I kind of like. And I think essentially that functions of government are going to continue to fall to distributed software. But money is clearly the biggest one of those functions. And I think Bitcoin captures 80% of the value of the entire movement, if not more. So I'm kind of 80-20, Bitcoin, everything else.
Nice, probably a sensible, rational place to be, I think. Robert, what would you say is your firmest conviction crypto opinion?
I truly believe, what I wrote in the Zero piece, that absolute scarcity for money is a one-time discovery. Any attempts to compete with Bitcoin as money will fail, and their value will just collapse into Bitcoin.
Very nice. All right, switching gears a little bit, Robert. I ask every guest this question. Who do you think wins the American presidential election 2020?
2020.
Because that's this year.
Yeah, I would just say probably Trump, but I don't follow politics in that way very much.
Diplomatically said. Very good. All right, Robert. Well, Bill Gates famously said, we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. What does the blockchain space look like in 10 years' time?
This is when I would encourage people to read The Sovereign Individual. I think the nation state, it's noticeably wounded today, could be dying by then, sort of as the model that we've come to understand. I think, again, as functions of government fall off, I think digital securities will be much more of a big deal, which is sort of a blockchain use case. And self-sovereign computing platforms like Urbit and these other things will kind of be on the path to mainstream adoption. So I think we'll see software eating the world a lot more and a lot of the nation state.
Yeah, interesting that you should mention The Sovereign Individual. That's I guess it's not a super famous book. It's probably an underground book, but reasonably well known in crypto circles. But it's been interesting to watch what's happening in the US at the moment, particularly, and look, not wanting to pick on the US too much, but we are sort of seeing some of those sovereign individual theses. The pandemic seems to be accelerating them, right?
Absolutely. Look, we all know monopolies don't work. So, government monopoly will fall. It's just a matter of when.
All right. Well, on a similar note, William Gibson, the sci-fi author, he said, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. Can you think of an example, Robert, of the future being here right now, but most people just aren't really aware of it?
Well, I would say Bitcoin is a clear example of that, right? It's probably the biggest innovation we'll ever see. I think it's kind of the capstone to the idea of money. It's the most perfect money we've ever made. But looking forward, like what the future might look like, I actually think it's really bright despite all the darkness right now. Bitcoin, it provides this perpetual global bounty program to seek out cheaper energy. And also, as we said, it's the most honest money that there's ever been. So these things taken in combination make us tremendously more productive, which drives down the cost of living and, frees people up for more artistic or cultural or spiritual pursuits. So I think the future is really bright, but, it's darkest before the dawn.
Very nice. Well, I think you've kind of just answered it, but the next question is, I like to say, let's zoom out. What do you see as the long-term future for the human race? Do you see dystopia or utopia?
The truth is always somewhere in the middle, and I'm under no disillusion that this, Bitcoin ushers in utopia, but it definitely gets us to the next evolutionary leap of civilization. Because there's so much efficiency loss right now due to fiat currency and government that it's mind-boggling. And when we fix that, I think as some people say now, it's a popular meme, fix the money, fix the world. I think that's just the battle of our generation.
Very nicely said, Robert. All right, well, finally, what is your favorite science fiction book, film, show, or universe?
Oh, wow. As a kid, I was really into the Marvel comic books a lot. But lately, as an adult, I really like the film Interstellar. I forget the director. He's done like the Batman movies and all that, but it's a really interesting kind of amalgamation of space-time and technology and transcendence. I thought that was a really cool movie. I've seen it a few times, so I'll go with that.
Yep, hey, look, it's a good choice, Interstellar, and of course, won't be surprising to learn that it is a Christopher Nolan film.
Christopher Nolan, yeah, he's great. Yeah, he did Inception too, right?
Correct, yes, he did. Very good. Well, there you have it, Robert. We have reached the end of a podcast. I feel like we've covered quite a lot of diverse ground today.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. We did cover a lot of ground. I haven't thought about some of the older pieces in a while, so I appreciate that.
Nothing else to say, really, except thank you for joining me today. Please, the microphone is yours. Tell the listeners where they can find you on your various platforms and where they should go to learn more about your Bitcoin thesis or get involved with Parallax Digital. Take it away.
Sure thing. So my name is Robert Breedlove. That's Breedlove, Breedlove, just like it sounds. My Twitter handle is @Breedlove22. I post most of my writing and everything else there. You can find the writings themselves on Medium. And I also started putting them on dig.com recently. They're also available on our website along with some other stuff. Which is parallaxdigital.io. That's PARALLAX digital.io.
Awesome. Well, and of course, links to all of those properties will be in the show notes. Hey, thank you very much, Robert. This one was a pleasure. All the best.
Hey, man, really appreciate it. Thanks again.
Okay, there you go. That was today's episode. That was actually one of my favorite podcasts in quite a while. I think I really enjoyed talking to Robert Breedlove. Really interesting guy with, really interesting perspectives on Bitcoin, I thought. So, as I keep saying, links are in the show notes to Robert's Medium pieces, the number 0 and Bitcoin, and an open letter to Ray Dalio. Both are fantastic reads. Do recommend them, but as I think was made clear, they are long reads, so do get comfortable. I suggest a nice couch, perhaps a single malt whiskey, and just kick back and inhale some Bitcoin knowledge. Now, links in the show notes also to one or two of the other pieces that popped up in today's podcast. Of course, Sapiens by Harari, that's a fantastic read. The Sovereign Individual, Also, a fantastic read, a lesser known book, but well worth your time as well. A piece by Ray Dalio on gold, and up to you if you can read that piece and perhaps surreptitiously insert Bitcoin as a subtext. Is that Ray's intention? Who knows? Anyway, and of course also Interstellar, that fantastic Christopher Nolan sci-fi movie. Okay, we're out of here. That was us. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave, a new coin.